The image of a witch trial in early modern Europe is often simplified into superstition, chaos, and blind ignorance. That explanation is incomplete. Witch hunts were not random outbreaks of hysteria. They were structured systems of accusation, legal procedure, and social reinforcement. They operated across centuries, across borders, and across different political systems. And at their peak, they were treated as legitimate justice. To understand how this happened, the focus must shift away from the idea of belief in magic alone. The real mechanism was fear interacting with authority, law, and uncertainty. In early Europe, daily life was fragile. Disease could spread without explanation. Crops could fail without warning. Children could die without clear cause. Modern explanations did not exist in public understanding. In that environment, uncertainty required interpretation. Religion provided one framework, but within that framework, misfortune was often interpreted as interference, not random chance, but intent. This is where the idea of witchcraft became structurally useful. It created a cause for the unexplainable. It gave communities a target for invisible problems. Witch accusations typically did not begin with organized institutions. They began locally. A neighbor falls ill. A child dies. A cow stops producing milk. A disagreement over land or money exists in the background. In such conditions, coincidence becomes narrative. People begin to connect unrelated events. Once a suspicion is formed, it does not remain isolated. It spreads through conversation, repetition, and reinforcement. Multiple people begin recalling unrelated signs that seem to confirm the suspicion. At this stage, belief is not yet institutional. It is social. The transition from rumor to trial required authority. Local courts, church structures, and legal officials provided that structure. Once an accusation reached a formal system, it changed form. It became documentation. It became testimony. It became procedure. And once procedure begins, it creates its own logic. Courts do not operate on uncertainty. They operate on decisions. Guilt or innocence must be established. But witchcraft accusations were fundamentally difficult to disprove in that legal framework. The crime itself was invisible. It left no physical evidence in the conventional sense. So courts relied heavily on confession and testimony. Confession became central, and confession was often extracted under pressure. Once a confession was obtained, it validated the entire process. It confirmed the suspicion, justified the trial, and reinforced the system that produced it. From there, additional names often emerged. This created chains of accusation. One case became multiple cases. One trial became a network. In some regions, this pattern expanded rapidly. Entire communities entered cycles of suspicion where each accusation reinforced the next. It is important to understand that this was not limited to one country or one institution. Witch trials occurred across different parts of Europe, with variations in intensity. Some regions saw relatively few cases. Others experienced concentrated waves over short periods. These differences were influenced by legal systems, political instability, and local tensions. Where authority was fragmented, accusations tended to escalate more easily. Where legal standards required stronger evidence, witch trials were less frequent. The profile of those accused also followed patterns. It was not random. Accusations often targeted individuals who were socially vulnerable. People without strong protection networks were easier to isolate, but accusations could also emerge from interpersonal conflict. Reputation, poverty, and social friction all played roles. There is no single category of witch. The category itself was constructed after the accusation. One of the most important elements in understanding witch hunts is the feedback loop between fear and explanation. Once witchcraft becomes an accepted explanation for misfortune, it becomes self-reinforcing. Any negative event can be interpreted through that lens. Each interpretation strengthens the belief system that produced it. This creates a closed system of reasoning. Evidence is no longer evaluated independently. It is interpreted within a predefined framework. Over time, intellectual and institutional changes began to weaken this framework. Advances in medical understanding reduced the need for supernatural explanations. Legal reforms increased evidentiary standards. Centralized authority reduced local variation in trials. As these changes accumulated, witch hunts declined, not because belief in superstition disappeared overnight, but because the system that supported legal action against it was dismantled. Looking back, witch hunts are often described as irrational episodes, but within their historical context, they were not viewed as irrational by participants. They were structured responses to uncertainty, shaped by the limits of available knowledge and the mechanisms of authority. The outcome was not driven by a single belief, but by a system where fear, law, and interpretation reinforced each other. Today, witch hunts are studied not only as historical events, but as examples of how systems of belief can become self-sustaining. When uncertainty is high and explanations are limited, societies tend to construct patterns of meaning. And once those patterns become institutional, they can produce outcomes far beyond their original intent. The witch trials of early Europe remain one of the clearest examples of how collective fear can become procedural reality, not through chaos, but through structure.